looking at agriculture in 1984, very Orwellian 1984 for India. The first application of the Green Revolution was in the state of Punjab in India, the most prosperous part of India, land of 5 rivers. That's where I'd done my MSc honors in particle physics. So I knew it to be prosperous and peaceful. And by 84, it had erupted in huge violence. 15,000 people had been killed. And later that year, in the city of Bhopal, a pesticide plant leaked, killed thousands that night, and have continued to kill people and maim people since then. And by the end of that year, I was asking myself, A, why are we doing agriculture in ways that requires these pesticides, that gets farmers so outraged that they have to rebel? And they were saying at that time, if you don't choose the crops you grow, if you don't decide how you'll grow them, you can't decide where you'll sell it, you can't decide the price at which it will be sold, we are living under slavery. So they were defining industrial agriculture, the Green Revolution, as a system of slavery. So I decided to study what was the Green Revolution. I was working for the United Nations University at that time for a program called Conflicts Over Resources. And I did a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution as a result of that deep study. And found, A, that the chemicals that were used in agriculture were actually, or had their origins in Hitler's IG Farben and Standard Oil partnership. The factories that made ammunition through the Haber-Bosch process also made the fertilizers. The same process used fossil fuels to burn synthetic fertilizer, to burn atmospheric nitrogen, fix atmospheric nitrogen, and turn it into ammonia. And on the one hand, that became the nitrate explosives. On the other hand, it became the synthetic fertilizers. The poison gases and nerve gases that had been used during the war were the ancestors of Zyklon B, which was then used to kill people in concentration camps. And that's the technology that then continued. It's just that the link to the violence was erased. And it's interesting because every time I raise this link, it's as if I'm telling some kind of fabricated system. But the companies that made it then are the same companies that made it now. It's the Bayers, the Monsantos. They used to be together called Mobe. They're together again. Standard Oil and IG Farben work together. So the companies that are driving our agriculture system have their origins in war. And the chemicals that are being used in agriculture are fossil fuel ingredients, and they are instruments of war. But the thinking it generates is a warlike thinking, Instead of biodiversity being our relatives, the insects pollinating our plants, the soil organisms fertilizing the soil, everything becomes an enemy. The fungicides have to be applied to kill the fungi in the soil, which are the reason the soil has life. Every insect is turned into an enemy with insecticides. Every plant is turned into an enemy with herbicides. I worked very hard during the UN Treaty on Convention on Biological Diversity. And I remember the Monsanto representative getting up and saying, we have created such smart technologies that they prevent the weeds from stealing the sunshine. As if the sun is only to be shining at the Roundup Ready soybean. Anyway, so what has this system given us? And before the industrial period is the colonial period. You in Ireland know, and we in India know, that extractivism from agriculture created famines. Famines were not because of lack of food. Famines were because of too much extraction. So commodification of agriculture and food on the one hand, and industrialization and use of war instruments in agriculture, the combination is what has given us 75% of the soil and water destruction, 50% 50% of the greenhouse gases. I wrote a book called Soil and Oil, Not Oil, showing every component, the production methods, which are about 14% of greenhouse gases. 20% comes from destroying forests to grow GMO soybean, which doesn't even get used for food. It's used for animal feed and biofuel. Another 20% for packaging and long-distance transport, food miles. And then, because you've created a system of monocultures, built into it is waste. 50% of the food in America is wasted. There's a very, very good book that you should read called The American Wasteland. And it's not just that food is thrown away by consumers. Food is thrown away in the field because the system that has redefined food safety in terms of uniformity. You know how the European standards of food safety work? They literally have trays through which, if it's a tray with an orange, if this orange goes through the hole, it's a little too small, it's treated as hazardous for your health. If it's too big, again, it can. So you have to have that perfect uniform size, which is why diversity has disappeared. The very criteria of breeding is based on uniformity. The DUS criteria, they call it. And so we used to eat 10,000 species of plants. Now we trade in about 12, and each of them we grow in uniformity. And in India, we are the home of rice. Indian peasants evolved 200,000 rice varieties from a wild grass. Just think of it again, 200,000. The Green Revolution destroyed a lot, but Navdanya, the movement I started, we have saved 4,000 rice varieties on our farm at Navdanya, and I hope some of you will come. We actually do a course called Yoga of the Earth, and we do another long course over September on Return to Earth, on the living seed, on the living soil, on the living food. That food has to be alive, and living economies of food, which is what you are all organizing and trying to develop. So my focus on seed began when I was invited to a meeting on biotechnology, 1987, before there was any GMO in the world. And the same industry that brought us chemicals were now saying we must own the seed. We don't make enough money from chemicals. And the way to own the seed is to do genetic engineering, because then they said we can then say we made something new and take a patent on it. And with the patent, we will then collect royalties exactly like the royalties collected in India from the peasants. Yeah, that led to the famines. It was land rents then, it's seed rent now. Yeah, so they said there'll be 5 companies controlling all seed, all food, all health. That's what they said at this meeting, 5 companies. And it's sure enough, it is 5 companies, 4 companies controlling 60% of the chemicals, 60% of the seed. And the same companies are big pharma controlling your health. First, they spread Roundup and give you cancer, and then they sell. Bayer sells the glyphosate and also has the patented cancer drugs. So, and they said, we have to ensure no farmer can save their seed. Because if they save their seeds, how can we sell? And therefore, we need an international law that will prohibit farmers from saving seeds and require patenting of seed. And that's what became the WTO TRIPS agreement, as it's called. That's the day I said, we're going to save seeds. We will not let them seed be a monopoly. And I started to create community seed banks across India and across the world too. We've created in India 150 community seed banks because, for me, seed is a commons. The pollinators give it to us. It belongs to them also. The soil organisms give it to us. They have their share. Our ancestors gave it to us. Our future generations have a right to it. And seed requires exchange. Seed requires constant adaptation. So the community seed bank, I just dedicated myself to saving every seed we could find. I would go to the remotest parts of India, encourage farmers to save their seeds, do collections, create seed banks. We have a beautiful seed bank on our farm in Dehradun. And we didn't say, oh, this will be useful. you know, because we could not insult nature and we couldn't insult our ancestors. Surely if they gave us the seed, they found value. And in the seeds we had saved were salt-tolerant seeds that have helped us survive floods and cyclones. When the cyclones come from the sea, they bring salt. We have seeds that can tolerate the salt. This Gates pretends he invented flood tolerance and salt tolerance, but all he did is steal our seeds. We have amazing millets that are so drought resistant that with a little bit of 5 drops of rain, they can give you food. In my calculation, we would have 400 times the food if we were eating millets. And they were called primitive grains, backward grains, and were driven out of cultivation. We call them forgotten foods. And we brought them back. And now everyone's realizing they're future foods. This 2023 is the year of millet. But of course, you can't just save seeds by themselves. So I had to work with farmers to encourage them to give up chemicals, which is the reason the commercial varieties, so-called modern varieties, have any relevance. They're bred for chemicals. So I encourage farmers to not use chemicals, to do ecological agriculture, to do farming. And then after a year, after 10 years, you know, they'd saved seed, they'd saved diversity, they'd done organic. They come to me and say, and now you got to help us market. It wasn't something I'd imagined. I mean, first I didn't imagine I'd look at agriculture. I didn't imagine here I would be trying to create systems to, you know, to distribute food, you know, to be selling rice and wheat. Anyway, in the initial days, I would load my Jeep and bring things to Delhi and call my friends and say, here are all these 30 varieties of different crops. And they said, but we don't know how to cook it. So I'd get my farmer friends and bring them to our office to teach people in the city how to cook a ragi, a mandua, all the millets. And then we started to hold exhibitions. And after one of the exhibitions, I was asked, actually by the government of Delhi, to have a cafe, which we accepted. And we started this cafe where people could learn about diversity of food, people could taste real food, and then before you know it, people started to find that real food is actually delicious, that chemical food is absolutely nutritionally empty. I mean, look at the figures. How much in 70 years of soil depletion has food lost its nutrients? Because as Howard said, the health of the soil, the health of plants, and our health is one health. It's not divisible. So sodium has disappeared in vegetables 49%, in fruits by 29%. Potassium 16% in vegetables, in fruits 19%. Magnesium 24%, 16%. Iron 27%, 24%. Copper 76%, 20%. Zinc 59%, 27%. No wonder there are all kinds of nutrient deficiencies because food is being measured as mass, as stuff, but food is not stuff. Food is life. Food is the currency of life. And as long as we grow food with care and love, that currency of life increases. So over 20 years in our valley, we did a study. Actually, it's even more since then. But I have in front of me the figures of the 20-year study. The organic matter content in chemical farms has gone down by 14%. It has increased 99% on organic farms. But you expect organic matter to be more where you return organic matter to the soil. But the interesting part is nitrogen, because synthetic urea is applied vigorously in chemical farming. But the nitrogen in the soil has decreased 22% with the application of urea, because 99% runs off, and 100% increase of soil nitrogen by not applying synthetic fertilizers, but allowing the soil organisms to do the work. Zinc, this is a figure that really shook up some public health doctors who visited us, because they're finding zinc deficiencies leading to large-scale depression. They're doing a lot of brain chemistry linked to depression. The zinc has decreased 37%. in 20 years on chemical farms, and it has increased 14% on the organic farms. Manganese decreased 17%, increased 14%. So what we really have is nutritionally empty food, produced by making the planet toxic and making our bodies toxic. Not only has the nutrients increased, we've got a 36-fold increase of fungi population in organic farms and a 47% decrease in chemical farms. And in bacteria, beneficial bacteria, 241% increase. So basically, I see good farming as cultivating the diversity of the soil and letting them cultivate the plants. We don't cultivate the plants. The seed cultivates itself, the pollinators give us 1/3 the food, and the soil organisms give us the rest. Ours is the little bit of effort of putting the seed into the soil and gifting in gratitude part of what the earth gave us as organic matter in the different ways in permaculture and biodynamics and organic farming. You can choose your path. So when the farmers came to me and said, now you got to help us, of course, we found ways to bring the excess, because both the Irish famine and the Indian famines were related to extraction, but also not allowing farmers to grow the diversity they need. You cannot have diversity with centralized extractive systems. The globalized food system must grow monocultures. It cannot grow diversity. Chemicals cannot tolerate diversity. So the chemical input on the one hand and the extractive economy on the other nourish disappearance of diversity, both the diversity of crop varieties, but diversity of nutrients in those crops. To grow true food, real food, which is becoming more and more important, because now the next colonization that's being imagined by the billionaires, they pushed globalization with the WTO. The 3 treaties that were imposed on us was one, the Intellectual Property Treaty, written by Monsanto. I have all the records, which company wrote which are part of the WTO agreements. Cargill wrote the Agriculture Agreement. Coke and Pepsi wrote the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement. These are the 3 treaties that impact food. Today, the billionaires like Mr. Bill Gates wants to make money through patented fake food, lab food. That's what he's pushing. I saw that they want to kill 1 million sheep in Ireland. Some financial consultancy has done this calculation that to reduce emissions, you must kill the animals. And not making a difference between the biogenetic cycles, which have been around forever. This planet was full of animals, and we didn't have greenhouse gases building up the way we do. So animals are being targeted now. Our local economies are being targeted, but local economies are our response to freedom. First, when you have local economies, 2 things start to happen. Local people know what they want to eat and will choose good food. And for me, this is no more a theoretical claim, because I started to encourage farmers. I said, yeah, I'll help you market in Delhi, but the real economy is your village. Because maybe there might be 3 people who want to eat what you grow, but your whole village of 50 people, you can grow different things in exchange. One grows the onions and the other grows the potatoes. And they've already created economies amongst each other. And diversity then grows with decentralization and localization. And diversity is the key to a good food system, a real food system. Diversity of the soil, diversity of plants, diversity of insects are matched to the nutritional density of our food. More importantly, the biodiversity in the soil is what makes for more phytochemicals, which then nourish the biodiversity in our gut. The 100 trillion gut microbiomes require a diverse diet. The minute you feed them the same thing, maybe pretend to feed them milk as soya bean, pretend to make them eat meat as soya bean, pretend to make them eat something else as soya bean, but for the gut microbiome, it is one molecule attacking it. And that's why we have so many allergic reactions. That's why we have so much inflammation, so many diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases. Let me just share with you very quickly the figures, because basically when you are creating local food hubs, this is the answer. You're giving an answer to this. Because of food-induced chronic diseases, cancer cures is 2.5 trillion now, diabetes 2.5 trillion, endocrine disruption to 540 billion, antibiotic resistance infections 1 trillion, infertility 3.6 billion, obesity 1.2 trillion, birth defect 22.9 billion, neurodegenerative diseases 2.4 trillion, autism 171 billion. That's what the industrial globalized sickness creating system is going. Your local food hubs are actually health hubs. They're growing health. And that's how we have to bring producers of good food and eaters of conscious food together. That's the economy that is unstoppable. When we do it with full knowledge, with full commitment, and it is, when I started to resist the idea of patenting of seed, and people used to think no one can challenge it. We've challenged it. We've written laws that say seeds and plants are not human inventions. They cannot be patented. That's our Indian laws. But our commitment now has to be, the revolution is growing good food and eating good food. And you can only do that when you build local food economies. The globalized economy of privileged food might bring it to a minority, but it will not be the economy. It'll be an indulgence of the super rich who are poisoning the rest with bad food. The economy in which everyone participates, not just all the members of community, but members of the soil community, members of the plant community, members of the insect community. That participation is the food economy. Food is the currency that connects us all. Eating is the dialogue through which we celebrate life. And I want to say thank you to all of you for doing this amazing work. Thank you.
Brilliant, Vandana. Thank you so much. Really powerful stuff. Okay, so we have about 12 minutes. So yeah, questions. What questions did people come up with in their breakout groups? Is there any? It was 5 breakout groups, I think. So some questions you'd like to ask Vandana.
Can local food hubs feed our country? How realistic is that?
The reality is that even today, 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms and largely local. Only 20% comes from the large-scale industrial farms, which are, as I mentioned, are not producing food. They're producing commodities. 90% of the corn and soy are being grown in the world, which are 2 of the crops that are covering the largest acreage. 90% goes for biofuel and animal feed.
Okay.
So it's not a food system.
Okay.
When you talk about can local and small feed the world, it's the only way the world will be fed, because small is more productive than the large when you measure the true productivity. Second, it's, as I mentioned earlier, local allows you to be diverse. Decentralization and diversity go hand in hand. And diversity, when you measure the total nutrition output, in Navdanya, I said yield only measures some stuff leaving for the market. It's not food. It doesn't measure the state of soil. It doesn't measure the quality of food. It doesn't measure the total food output of a farming system. So we said we won't measure yield per acre, which is a commodity measure. We will measure nutrition per acre and health per acre. And that's what we measured. So the more the biodiversity on a farm, the more the nutrition it produces. And the less the external inputs it needs, is because the biodiversity performs the functions of pest control, of nutritional regeneration, of regenerating the soil. and improving the nutritional content of food. So when you look at health and nutrition and the full basket of food, a basket of food, not a monoculture commodity. Of course, if the world is filled with soya, there'll be lots of soya, but that doesn't mean there'll be more food. More food means more diversity, means more circularity, means more relationships. And it's in the small and the local that is what gets amplified. Second, everyone must eat. Now, today, what we are doing is shipping food thousands of miles away, degrading it in the process and reducing its diversity, reducing its quality. And that is why we have both a planetary crisis and a health crisis. We've been made to think that large means more in terms of anything. No, large just means more power, domination, profits, control. It does not mean more food. More food means more local systems. It's more food moving from the farms that grow it to people who must eat it.
Brilliant.
I have a book on this subject called Who Really Feeds the World? It was written for the Milan Expo. I was the ambassador to that expo, and they wanted me to write the background book for it. So it's called Who Really Feeds the World?
Thank you.
Thanks, Vandana. So group 2, there was Ali, Susie, and Aoife. Do you have a question? Did you come up with something you'd like to ask?
Well, it was as we try to do this decommodification of food at the localist level, we were wondering about that connection you talked about when the farmers you suggested, reconnect to your local villagers. That's the most vital connection. And we wanted to know a little more about those actual examples of the challenges that they had in doing that and how they overcame any of those challenges.
Yeah. I think the simple thing is a switch from the commodity mindset to us as living beings. And us as living beings need to eat. And the minute we see ourselves as growers and eaters of food, then the village itself includes people who have to eat. They're not just producers, they're also eaters. And therefore, the economy, local economy can begin right there at the local community level. Then it can expand outwards. And my thesis is that the most important things you need should grow locally. You can grow some diversity to trade to distant places. Yeah, of course, you'll have to have your coffee from Guatemala. You will have to have bananas from somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that you don't grow the staples. It doesn't mean, what's happening to Indian farming as it's happening to the third world because of World Bank and IMF laying out these recipes. They told us don't grow food, grow cash crops, they called it. They made people grow tomatoes and potatoes. When every farmer is growing tomatoes, the price of tomato crashes. And farmers are throwing their tomatoes away. Meantime, they bought the seed for 100,000 rupees and bought chemicals because those seeds need chemicals and are in debt. So these systems of long distance supply chains are what creates distress for farmers and creates scarcity while creating pseudo surpluses. Say, too much of some things and not real food for the people. So it's really all the blocks really are in the mind, because the reality of food is everyone needs to eat. So the more you grow diversity locally, and the movement that has grown very beautifully, very organically in India, because of Monsanto trapped farmers in such deep debt in the cotton areas that farmers ended up committing suicide. 400,000 farmer suicides in India, 85% in the cotton areas, which Monsanto totally controls. So I saw these widows totally, hopeless, constantly crying. And I said, come, let's plant a garden. Because they'd lost their land, they'd lost their husband, but they had their little hut and they had a little patch of land. So we started Gardens of Hope. And these Gardens of Hope are where women now exchange vegetables amongst each other. They grow seed and sell seed locally. Some of the widows have become seed, community seed suppliers. And during COVID, where everything had locked down, where the people growing tomatoes and potatoes were stuck because no one was there to pick it up, the women with their gardens were supplying the community.
Powerful.
So I would welcome you all to join the movement of Growing Gardens of Hope.
It resonates. Mike, Paul, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
I guess our question, we were thinking more about like what are the steps involved? Is there like a roadmap from A to B, and some of the obstacles that that different
the
people are
roadmap is
facing?
the relationship. The roadmap is not a place A separated from a place B separated. You'll never join two separated points. But when you realize food is the currency, food is the flow, then the relationship between the growers and the eaters is the roadmap. And because of what we are living through in terms of the health pandemic of every kind, I think just connecting people, because all the time you're totally stuck with, real food, good food, ecological food, organic food for the rich, for the privileged, for the elite. And people forget that the reason that bad food is cheap is not because it's cheap to grow. It's very costly to grow. It's cheap because it's hugely subsidized on the one hand and is built on the backs of the distress of farmers who are underpaid for what they grew. Like I talked about the tomatoes. Farmers are in constant distress. Look at the milk producers. Look at anybody. They're not selling above cost price. They're selling below cost price. And that's the design of the system. So we've done the health per acre. We have a report. You should be able to find it somewhere. And then we did a wealth per acre. Said we'll do the true cost accounting. And people participating in local economies, growing a diversity of crops, having their own seed sovereignty is the first part of the roadmap. The second is no chemicals and no purchased seed, because that's where the hemorrhaging of the rural areas takes place. And third is grow nutrition. And the minute you put it all together, the farmers growing local seed, using local seeds, growing ecological food, distributing locally, their incomes are 10 times more than those chasing the global commodity supply. So the economy works better. But of course, the entire calculus of the marketplace makes you believe that it doesn't. But actually, it works better. First, because you're spending nothing. And second, you're getting a true price. I will tell you another little story. In the suicide area, eventually I started to save cotton seeds and started seed banks there. And the farmer who became the first person saving seeds and started, and helping with the seed bank, he had saved so many seeds of vegetables, he started to grow them. And then he said, and villagers would come to his farm, go to the farm and say, we would like to buy some of it. And then, till 10 o'clock, he was not available for anything to do with our organization, because from 7 a.m. till 10 a.m., he would sit in the village square with vegetables, with organic vegetables of indigenous seeds. And his own village would buy it at high price because people know about quality of food. So this myth that, good food is a luxury is not true. I have worked with so many movements in India where the poorest are the ones who lead the fight for real food because they can't afford the rubbish, I'm talking about people who are being pushed into, having soya oil instead of mustard oil, or packaged biscuits instead of children's hot meals. So it works.
Thank you for that. And there's one last group. So Gráinne, Mary and Neve, do you have a question you'd like to ask before we let Vandana leave? I'm happy to stay on a bit longer for if other people would like to stay and have a chat, because it's much earlier in Ireland than it is in India. So if you'd like that, that's cool. But so Gráinne, Mary or Neve, if you'd like to come in with your question before we let Vandana leave.
We didn't completely agree, but if it's okay, Mary and Eve, is it okay to ask the question I was kind of thinking about? We were just wondering if this work on seed sovereignty and soil health and food sovereignty, does it land differently in countries and nations that have experienced colonialism?
Yes, because the historical sense makes us much more aware. When I organized a 500,000 farmers rally, the tallest farm leader, I went to him to explain to him what was happening with GATT and he looked at me cynically, and he just kind of, for a long time, looked very doubtfully at me. And then at a certain point when I said something, I think it was about owning seed, he just jumped up and said, I get it now. You're telling me that the East India Company is coming back. Because he remembers from history what that meant. So definitely the experience of slavery helps you recognize it in new forms. And it helps. But at another level, everyone's been colonized. Who hasn't? Nature's been colonized. Women have been colonized. All cultures have been colonized. So I don't think it's a time to kind of create, there's no privileged colonization in a way. Yeah. We all have been victims, along with nature, of a worldview that's mechanical in its thought, technocratic in its tools, and greedy in its economy. And the shift that we have to make, and other thing that's very important about local food systems is that's where you can make a difference. You cannot today decide, I'll do a different supply chain from Cargill's and change the world. No, that's not our role. Our role is to build from the grassroots up, to build from the soil up, to build with the earthworms upwards, and do the real work of care for the earth, care for our community. That is agriculture. Agriculture means care for the land. Eating means care for the earth and caring for your body and caring for your community.
That's amazing, Vandana. Listen.
And just a moment, I'm seeing all these babies on the screen, and I want first to say hi to them. And I want to tell you something else ridiculous that's happening. So Mr. Gates, of course, pretends to be the biggest savior against climate change. And one of his patented technologies is something called biomilk. And this is a genetically engineered, lab-made breast milk, as if the lovely mothers on the screen feeding their children are leading to emissions and climate change. Literally lab-made breast milk as a climate solution. So we're not just against bad food, we're against fake food, and we're against fake science of a very, very severe kind. And that's why, trust and confidence in knowledge that comes from doing and working in community, that is the force that we have to build. And I wish you the best.
You're certainly a powerhouse, Vandana. So listen, thank you so much. If people would like to come off mute just to say your thank yous, and well, hopefully we can connect. If you're ever in Ireland, you'll have many homes to visit and places to stay, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vandana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very inspiring.